Hey there, it's the Board Game Bandit with another episode of Smash Up. I'm here with Sarah Trager and Eric Glassey, and today we're going to be talking about the all-new Sheep faction released at the end of December in 2017. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Jim, for having us.
Thanks for having me.
So, the Sheep faction, always nice to get a free faction, although one that took about a year of waiting, I would say. Sarah, do you remember when you filled out the form?
Ooh, I think it's got to be in the summer, maybe early summer or spring. It's been a while.
I thought it was actually even longer than that because I remember that it was before they even released What Were We Thinking that the Sheep faction was announced. So that would actually put it, a very long time ago, it seems. And Eric, you did not fill out the faction. You did not fill out the survey, correct?
No, I did not want to follow the flock.
So what were you thinking? And I heard what you did there, and just stop. As I said, it's always nice to have a free faction. I want to thank AEG for providing this opportunity, and to their credit, if you validated your email, as far as I knew, you got a tracking information when it was shipping, and then it shipped shortly after that. It was a little nerve-wracking. I was so afraid that I was going to incorrectly input my address, even though I had some people validate my validation. I just knew that if it was going to backfire on someone, it was probably going to be me because I wanted it so much. Sarah, what was your experience like?
I was a little bit more laid back. I really wanted the sheep faction. I adore sheep. I love sheep. I actually used to have some sheep when we lived on a farm, and I just love them. They're awesome. So I was really excited about the faction, but I was a little bit more laid back about the experience. And I put my address in. The one thing that I was a little bit nervous about was that our lease came up after our address had put in, and I thought, well, if we move, I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to pan out. But we ended up not moving, and when they put the links back up to revalidate your address after it had been so long, I just went back in, I double checked everything, and I submitted it, and then I waited. I didn't even look at the tracking information on mine. And when they got there, it was kind of like almost like a pleasant surprise. I knew they were coming, but I didn't know when or anything like that. So a little bit more laid back, but overall I was very excited to receive them. And when I got them, I was even more excited because I started looking through, and I love the art, and some of their effects I think are unique, and it's going to bring some cool stuff to the game.
Did either of you check the Smash Up wiki to see what spoilers had been posted about the sheep?
I saw a few on when they posted on their Facebook page that I saw, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool about the one where the flock actually, where it follows one after another.
I didn't look on the wiki. I looked at the emails, the Smash Club emails that they sent, and a few of those had a couple of cards here or there that they were just showing like the artwork or the things like that. And then I do follow all the social media, so anything that they post on social media, I saw that, but I didn't look at the spoilers on wiki.
So I totally admit to looking at the wiki on a fairly regular basis to see if more updates had been published, and someone had published a German translation of all the cards that is actually pretty accurate based on what the final cards were. There was one card that is called Shearing that was actually changed pretty significantly from what was initially proposed, and I'll talk about that a little bit later because it would have created a uber combination in my opinion. But overall, I think that this was a pretty fun faction to play. I've played it twice so far. Have either of you played it yet?
I played somebody that was playing it, but I have not played it personally.
I have not played myself.
To be fair, it's only been about a week, so and it's right around the holidays, so not a lot of time. I just went out of my way to make sure that I played it as soon as possible in preparation for this. And what I would say is that two very important points stand out about the sheep. Number one, the definition of particular words and particular aspects of timing seems more important than ever, and that was a theme in both of the games that I played with them. And this is a faction that you have to play very carefully because it's a little bit quirky, and I always enjoy a faction that does not play straightforward and requires you to think outside the box or think outside the fence. Eric, yeah, I can do it too.
Yes, I'm so proud.
I agree. I was looking, I haven't gotten to play, but I looked over all the cards, and I was looking at the wording, and it does seem like there are more instances with this faction than with more of the other factions where the wording is incredibly specific. The timing elements are very important. There's a lot of, you play this after something, or something moves when you do this, and so the wording on the card seems like you have to pay particular attention to this faction whereas some of the other factions are a little bit more forgiving with their wording.
Yeah, order really matters with this one.
So we're just going to jump right in and talk about what I think is the great sheep debate of 2017. If you saw the flock on the first AEG email that announced that what the flock was going to be, and that's after a minion moves from this base, the flock moves with it, I think several people, myself included, immediately thought this faction is going to be great with pirates because of the first mate. And if the first mate is on the base, the flock would move off the base, and now you'd theoretically have twice the number of first mates if you were playing sheep pirates. And I was slightly disappointed to read on the Smash Up Wiki that that actually does not work based on how those words were interpreted, that the movement doesn't actually occur until after the other cards are discarded. And to challenge that, I'm going to break out the original Smash Up rulebook as well as the Big in Japan rulebook, which is the latest edition. So, on page 6 of the original rulebook, it says, after scoring, players can use special abilities that happen after a base scores. Then all cards still on that base go to the owner's discard piles. The fact that it says then and still implies that the minion is actually moved off of the base before the other cards go into the discard pile, meaning that the movement occurs not in simultaneous, that people are going in different directions, but that the movement happens first, which would activate the flock and it would move with it, and then...
And continue the power to another base.
Yes. And that same wording is repeated in the Big in Tokyo rulebook on page 8. So the fact that it wasn't just that this is a modern definition that has changed with the cards. This was the definition from the very onset of the game. And when the base game came out, there were very few cards that would actually linger from base to base. One of them being a scout, one of them being the first mate, and one of them being anything beamed up by the mothership base for the aliens. So that's either an incredible amount of foresight on their part, or they always intended for the movement to happen before the actual discard pile. And if you use the Smash Up app, you'll see that the minion actually does move off before other specials are triggered. So if you have a first mate and a scout, the first mate will completely move off, and then you'll have a choice as to whether or not to trigger the scout, and everybody else is still on the base, which to me means that the movement actually does occur before the discarding, not at the same time as the discarding.
Does the app have the sheep faction in it yet?
No, it only has the base 8 plus the geeks.
Okay. Because it'll be interesting to see if how the app would have acted with it.
That actually is a very interesting point, because as a singular faction, the geeks were the only other singular faction that got included in the app. It might make sense to actually include the sheep in the app, because then you only have to do one, and it's another promo-like faction. I think it would work well.
I think it's interesting because if you read the card, it says, ongoing, after another minion moves from here to another base, move this minion there as well. To my mind, the after keyword there, that you can look at it as one of two ways. You can do it immediately after or anytime after. And if you do it immediately after, then it would trigger before anything else happens. As soon as you would move a minion from the base that the flock is on to another base, you would immediately trigger the action of the flock card, which would be to move this minion there as well. However, it doesn't technically specify whether it is an immediate action or if it is any time after. So I think that might be where some of the confusion is coming in, because the card doesn't say. But I do think that your interpretation of the original rule set, that aligns with what I was thinking too. So
who wrote the wiki that said that it doesn't work that way? And what authority do they have to say that it doesn't work that way?
I'm not sure. For the most part, I tend to agree with their assessments, but I also looked up assessments on the Scout with the Evan Cemetery, where you discard, if you're the winner, you discard your hand. Well, if you're a Scout, do you pull the Scout up and then do the discard? Do you do the discard and then pull the Scout up? And they were saying that no matter what, the Scout goes back to your hand because the two occur simultaneously and they're kind of passing each other by.
Like ships in the night. Gotcha. Okay. That actually was no
Like-
pun. That was
like
just,
sheep in the night.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Sarah, for catching what I did not. Oh my God, this is my day.
So-
Both people made puns. My year is complete.
Merry Christmas. So I disagreed with that assessment as well. And I think it's built on the same logic that it clearly is meant to be a distinction of steps. And I expect that we would see an official answer sooner rather than later, because if that ruling is incorrect, then the sheep just lost their strongest pairing that there was by far.
So, how do you roll with the cemetery and scout?
I think it's something where the order actually matters, because if you remember, we had a conversation where the current player chooses the order of effects.
Right.
So if you were to pull the scout back up and then actually activate the base, the scout would be discarded along with the rest of your hand. Whereas if you did it the other way around, discard your hand, then pull the scout back up, the scout would persist, and that would be a way of, well, who broke the base? You know, if you're the aliens and I broke the base, well, I would screw you over by making it so that way the scout was discarded.
So you could do the same thing with if you're playing these sheep pirates and I broke the base, I could say you can move your pirate guy, but you cannot move your sheep until after the
I would argue
base
no,
breaks.
because of a period. Again, it says after scoring, players can use a special ability that happens after a base scores. So the special ability resolves in its entirety. So and then it's saying then. Then implies a different state of time, and I think that the sheep ongoing would kick in immediately before that.
So that negates the current player's order power.
Right, because
Okay.
they're technically occurring in the same phase, and then that phase resolves in its completion before moving on to the next phase.
So the owner would determine that order.
I think that you break it down so you have before a base scores, when a base scores, after a base scores, and then base cleanup. And I think base cleanup is a completely distinct phase from after a base scores. So you could finagle the order of the after a base scores. So, for example, there is a ninja base where you can destroy a minion. So you could technically kill the first mate before he moves.
Eliminating the power of the sheep.
Right, so the sheep would die along with it. But you can't just all of a sudden rearrange phases. That would be incorrect in my opinion.
I would tend to agree. I think in the spirit of the game, there is the base scoring phase and then the cleanup phase. And it has to be that way, logically, because before you can clean anything up, you need to know how much you scored for it. So you score everything first, and anything that would happen during that scoring phase, like minions moving or that kind of thing, happens then. And then you actually pick up all the cards that would be discarded, put the base back in the box, that kind of thing. That's the cleanup phase. So to my mind, the spirit of the rule is, as you were saying.
And this is also important because there is a base out there, and the first time I played the sheep with actually the pirates, and I made sure that my opponent was in agreement with these rules, this base came out. It's the pasture. It's a 25 breakpoint 532, and it says after the first time you move a minion to this base each turn, notice it's each turn, not your turn, move another minion from there to here. So I moved the first mate onto the pasture and took another minion along for the ride because I was activating the base's ability, because I'm just assuming that the minion was still on the actual base. If that turns out to be if I turn out to be incorrect as far as this goes, that's okay. But as a result, I think sheep pirates go down in power significantly. And that leaves the next question of, if not pirates, then what faction would you use with the sheep?
I'm going to take one from the player who I saw playing the sheep, and I'm going to go with Bear Cavalry because they have a lot of movement.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to pull off the combo that I wanted.
Which combo is that that you were trying for?
So there's a higher ground card that when a minion gets moved onto a base with a minion of yours on it, no matter what the power, that minion immediately gets destroyed. And there's a very specific card called On the Lamb. Choose a base where you have a minion and another player. move that minion and all of that player's minions from there to a single other base, which would basically blow up all of your minions on a single turn.
So you would sacrifice your one lamb?
No, mine would survive.
So wait, the higher ground only destroys the other player's minions?
Yes.
Okay. So you wouldn't have a sacrificial lamb.
One day he'll learn to stop doing this.
But today is not that day.
Yes. High ground says play on a base, ongoing. If you have a minion here, destroy any other player's minion that moves here. So only the other player's minions get destroyed. And it would have been a great way to reset the board. But unfortunately, I just never drew that card because sheeps have a little bit of card draw, and unfortunately mine got destroyed pretty much at the start of the game.
Yep.
One thing I really enjoy about Smash Up is how factions that ordinarily don't work well work extremely well with other factions that fall into the same category. And when you're trying to figure out how to use a faction like the sheep, which based on what I've been reading, a lot of people think that they are bad. No, don't do it. Do not do it. I've already seen people do it. Don't.
I don't know what you're talking about, Joe.
I knew that if I said bad, he would make that into a pun. Go ahead. You can do it.
So, Jim, how many bad puns am I allowed to do?
So when I look at a card like Counting Sheep, play on a base, ongoing, after the power of another player's minion increases, your minions here gain +1 power until the end of the turn. Now this is a very interesting card because there are a lot of factions that are all about increasing power, like Astro Knights, or Mythic Greeks, or Giant Ants. But if you play that card, they're going to be wary of actually increasing their power because they don't want to give you a power boost. But when you look at the card very carefully, you'll notice that it says, after the power of another player's minion increases. In other words, it's another player's minion, but it never actually says who does the increasing, which actually makes the sheep a very good combination with elves, which are all about increasing other people's power in order to increase your own power. So looking at some of the elf cards, after another player plays a minion here, you may place a +1 counter on it to place a +1 counter on one of your minions here. So you could place the +1 counter on someone else's minion to immediately trigger a +1 until the end of the turn, which may trick them into breaking a base that they did not intend to break. And hopefully, if your power is greater, the power that you gain is greater than the overall power, you can surprise them really quickly. The Elf Help Guru that says give all players' minions here +1 power until the end of the turn. That's another way of doing it, activating it on your turn. So it's funny how two factions that seem weak on the surface actually combine well together. And that's just one of the specific cards that I think stands out for sheep. That's Counting Sheep.
It's Counting Sheep. I don't even think you did that one on purpose.
No, that's literally the name of the card. It's Counting Sheep.
Sorry.
But it'll help you sleep, though.
I was thinking that maybe the steampunks might be a nice faction to put with the sheep, because the steampunks you can salvage stuff out of the discard pile. So if your sheep were to get tossed into the discard pile, you might be able to get them back out. And then, and because they can move around so much, that might be nice. And then also, they have additional cards that would allow you to move in between bases. So it would pair nicely, I think, with the ability of the sheep to move around as well. And it would provide a really solid base of cards that would play off of each other nicely, I think. Never tried it before, but it seems it could be fun.
I could see that. You've got the, I think it's Captain Ahab on the Steampunks, who can basically move to where another one of your actions is played. You can continually get Counting Sheep back, which could be a nice power surge.
You could have there's a ship that they have on a base that they could transport other minions besides Captain Ahab, so you can move any of your minions around, and then the sheep can just follow. And if you have like rotary
slug thrower.
Yes, the rotary slug thrower, you could just double your power on that base really quickly.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point. I think that the sheep are a swarm-based power activation that would probably do better with more players rather than fewer. because more players means more bases. You can spread your minions out and then coalesce them onto a single base. And with a card like Rotary Slug Thrower or Agromotive, which is +5 power, if you have a minion here that doesn't supply any power, then all of a sudden you move all the power onto one. It lets you break the base on your turn and avoid power creep, because the alternative is if the power is always there, then other people can utilize that and overtake you and break the base themselves.
Yeah, it's a good deterrent to have on base.
Mythic horses might be an interesting one to pair with sheep too, because there's a mechanic in the Mythic horses deck that it gives you bonuses the more minions you have on the same base. And with some of the sheep cards, it seems like it will be really easy to stockpile sheep on a particular base. So maybe paired with that ability of the Mythic horses to do extra stuff the more minions you have, that could be interesting.
I think the Mythic horses also have a free movement card that I'm going to check. Yes, the Mythic horses have a card called Friendship Power. Move one of your minions to a base where you have a minion. You may place this action into your hand instead of the discard pile. So you could basically move a minion every single turn and just activate the power as a result. All the flocks go along with it, and then the pinkies get stronger, and anything else that is based on the number of minions on the base would also get stronger. So I see any swarm-based faction is going to work well with sheep, particularly ones that get benefits from having everybody on the same base. One combo that I've seen people asking about is the rock stars, and I'm not sure that that's actually a good combination, but it's hard to tell because I actually consider rock stars to be one of the best factions there are. There's very few things that they can't actually do. They don't have destruction, but they have everything else. They have extra minion plays, they have card draw, they have recycling, they have searching through your deck, they have specials. So every faction is going to seem like it is good with them. Is it a synergistic pairing, or are the Rockstars just good and it's able to overcome, any fault of the sheep? The reason why I don't think they work well together is because the sheep are all about moving other minions together onto bases, and the Rockstars tend to just drop all their minions on the same base to begin with. So I'm not sure that that's a synergistic pairing.
Yeah, the Rockstars seem more like an explosion than a creep or a spread out and then flock.
Right, because you could use your action to move, or you could use your action to play an extra minion, which turns into 5 groupies, and that's 5 power, or use an action to increase the power of your minions and just use your groupie. And they already have the movement with the Rickroll, which will move from lower power breakpoints to higher power breakpoints, so I'm not sure that their sheep are really adding anything. I think if you combine the Rockstars with Destruction, then you have a deck that can do everything, and you probably can't lose.
Right.
Any other factions you could think of that would work well with sheep?
It's hard for me not to think of them simply from an artistic standpoint, because like I said, I love sheep. So I'm like, we could have like the sheep explorers, and I'm picturing them in like little explorer hats trotting through the jungle, So I'm just being absolutely ridiculous about it, but I think because it's such a fun faction, and because I enjoy sheep so much, it just seems like it would be fun to pair with anything.
Actually, I think the exploring sheeps would work really well for a couple of reasons. Number one, you have the guide. The guide says, after the first time each of your minion moves in a turn, it gains +1 power until the end of the turn.
So would that be like the shepherd?
Moving on, the explorers also have a specific card called, you call this Archaeology. Move one of your minions. You may play this before or after a base scores. Now, because it says move one of your minions, not instead of the discard pile, that would very clearly happen after the base scores, and this card was quoted as being an exception to the first mate problem because it doesn't wait for the other cards to go into the discard pile. So in that case, the flock would immediately move off with the minion that you moved. So I think Exploring Sheep would actually be a great combination.
Another one I was thinking of was the Magical Girls from the Big in Japan expansion. They have abilities that will allow you to do things the more minions you have on a base. And because we said it is so easy to pile up sheep on a base, that might be, like you said, anytime we're dogpiling on a base, this would be a good faction for that. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you can not only gain power boost, but you could also reduce the breakpoint based on the number of minions. So if you play things very carefully, you could throw all your minions on a base, reduce the breakpoint significantly, and break it by yourself.
One that I was thinking of was zombies, because they can. If you have a lot of sheep in your discard pile and you can play the zombie lord, you can just suddenly spread your flock out there. And that was not a pun. That is the power 2
Yes.
flock. And you can spread your power, and then you can just consolidate. It'll be easy to keep playing that one if you keep pulling your zombie lord out.
Right, so you basically have all of your minions in play, and they, again, can all just coalesce onto individual bases.
Zombie sheep don't sound very cute, though.
Yeah, that wouldn't be cute at all.
I guess they could swing from being cute and being terrifying. That's fine.
This is Sarah's nightmares, seeing zombie sheep. Like, you had our wall.
So we've talked a lot about the sheep movement, but that is not the only thing that they do well. The other thing they do well is that they can copy other people's abilities, which makes sense, sheep and cloning and all that. And there's a couple of cards that do this specifically. The first one is Wood for Sheep, a reference to the Catan trade that never seems to happen. And this says, choose another player. Reveal a random card from their hand. You may place a card from your hand into their hand to play the revealed card as an extra card, otherwise return it. And you have To Follow or Not, which says, choose another player, choose a random action in their discard pile, play it as an extra action or return it, then draw a card. And the final card is Hello Dolly. Play after another player plays an action, copy the ability of that action. So these are going to be very, obviously there's a lot of action focus on that with the In Sheep's Clothing and To Follow or Not. So who would you use sheep as a counter to? Are there any specific factions that jump out?
So I have a point I want to ask about the To Follow or Not. Some action cards require a prerequisite condition. Do you have to ignore that condition? I mean, do you get to ignore that condition, or is that condition still in play? Still required?
That is TBD.
TBD determined, yeah.
There is a lot of interesting things that were introduced as part of this deck, and we'll get to some of those examples.
Okay. But your question was which factions would go well with that, considering that, or which factions are they a good counter to?
Which factions are they a good counter to?
Well, the one that immediately popped into my mind was the ninjas, because the ninjas are a pretty powerful faction. We've talked on this podcast before about how we don't feel any one particular faction really overpowers any of the other ones, but I do feel like in the right hands, the ninjas can be incredibly powerful. So the ability to kind of copy some of the cool stuff that your opponent is doing with the ninjas, or to just constantly be flooding the bases with your sheep while the ninjas are trying to, bounce around and accomplish things. I think that could be kind of a, it may not stop or slow the ninjas completely, but I think it would definitely provide some challenges for them that may not be provided with other factions.
So copying the hidden ninja. Oh, you're going to add a minion at the last second. I'm going to add a minion at the last second. That does sound pretty awesome.
One that I was thinking of was the steampunks, because if you can just get one of their play on the base actions, you can capture a very powerful action card that's yours till the base breaks.
Yes, and it's worth knowing that it basically acquires the card text, which means if anything happens to the original action, Hello Dolly is left unaltered. So it still lingers there. So if you can copy a rotary slug thrower on a different base, well then, you can use that to your advantage really well.
Exactly. I think you have one that you want to bring up.
Well, you have to be very careful about this, because To Follow or Not, you get a random action, and with Wood for Sheep, you get a random card. So there's much more flexibility with the random card, because it can be a minion, and you could always play the minion. There's going to be probably little downside to that. But what happens if you draw an action that doesn't actually do you any good? So an example would be drawing something like an augmentation, which gives you +4 power. unless you're planning on breaking a base, that card doesn't actually do you any good. Especially if it's already in their discard pile, you're not gaining anything by taking it out of their hand. So it's a little bit of a toss-up as to what you're going to get. You would need to think about who on average has an action that would be good as sort of a lead-off action. And wizards come to mind because the wizards have a lot of actions that seemingly have no consequence. Drawing cards, playing an extra minion, scry to search your deck for any particular action. That's really powerful. Mass enchantment, although mass enchantment may reveal a minion and not actually pan out, at least it does something rather than a simple card that provides no value and is immediately gone. If you can get Mythic Greeks who have some of the strongest actions in the game, that could be pretty amazing. Just like the Wizards, they have a card that lets you play 2 additional actions. And if you also know that there are because the discard pile is public at all times, if you know that there are very few actions and you like your odds of whatever it is you're going to get, then it may be worth taking the risk. But later on in the game, that card is not going to be very good because you have simply no idea what you're going to get.
An interesting scenario I want to throw out there is if you're playing with the Big in Japan expansion and you're played that card and you get one of the other people's cards that allow them to play their Titan, and you played that card,
you get the Titan.
You get the Titan.
I think that would also be true even if you just got a minion from them, right? You would, even if we weren't playing with the Titans, you
and that minion would stay on the board, right?
Yeah, when you play a card, you become the controller of the card, and it is possible to take someone else's Titan away. And yeah, definitely, I could see if you guess right on that, that would be a major inconvenience, especially since a lot of those factions are driven by their Titans.
And just to get off track a little bit, the Big in Japan, one of the factions, which is I think it's like the itty bitty creatures, where it has an action where you take control of a minion of 3 or less, and you put it into your deck. You could use that one to capture one of the others that has play your Titan, and it's a +3. It's a 3 minion, and so you can take control of that guy to control their Titan.
They also have an action that lets you just summon the Titan. You basically evolve one of your creatures into Rainbow Rock. I think I'm saying that correctly.
The enemy's Titan?
Well,
into your own Titan.
The itty creatures. I'm gonna actually look up this card
because I was playing with my brother the other day, and I kept taking his play your Titan card minion. I just keep taking them, take them off of base, put them in my deck, and he was just like, "I hate that card so much." I would basically just use it as a deterrent for him and weakening his Titans.
So there's 2 of these. There's Evolution. Choose one of your minions. Destroy it to play Rainbow Rock there, or search your deck for a minion with up to 1 more power. So if you were to grab that card, you can all of a sudden play Rainbow Rock and become its controller.
But that deck. You have Ragnarok. That card.
Right, I'm saying if the sheep get that card.
Oh, the sheep get that card.
Yeah. You've all of a sudden gotten their Titan.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty good one to get.
And would you destroy one of their minions or one of your minions?
One of your minions, because your always means the controller.
Okay.
But that's worth it.
So extrapolating this out, if they were then to regain control of their Titan, could you send the minion that you control that allowed you to gain control of their Titan, could you send that to your discard pile, retrieve it, and then regain control of the minion that they had regained control of?
No, because when it goes into the discard pile from play, it goes into its owner's discard pile.
Oh, okay.
But if you play the Critter Cube that specifically says to shuffle it into your deck, that actually is okay.
Yeah, it's now your control.
Interesting.
You still don't own it, but it is now in a different location.
Yep. And away from them and their manipulative ways.
So we've already covered the itty critters, the magical girls. It's almost like they were designing the sheep faction at the same time as many of these others, so there's likely going to be a number of synergies there as well. There tend to be a lot of synergies among the factions that get shipped at the same time, so if this one was in production, it doesn't surprise me that they intentionally or unintentionally have synergies with everything else.
And they're coming out with Titans for all the factions, correct?
Yes.
So what could you imagine being the Titan for the sheep?
That is a great question. I'm going to take a minute to think about that.
You could have like a Trojan sheep, and it would be like the Trojan horse, except like a giant sheep. It would be kind of fun.
But wouldn't it be more like mythic horses?
Yeah. Or mythic Greeks.
If the Titan for the Mythic Greeks is not a Trojan horse or some parody name of it, I'm going to be personally disappointed because that would be a missed opportunity.
Indeed.
The only one they've revealed so far in the latest newsletter was the giant boulder for the explorers, and I just think that's hysterical. So, I mean, when you think about what the faction does, it does movement, it does cloning. I think that a Titan would probably want to be really good. I don't know. There's usually a condition that makes the Titan eligible to be in play. I'm not really sure what that would be. It might be something like, after 2 of your minions move on a turn or something like that, because it's all about movement. I would like to see a cloning-based Titan that basically has the talent to acquire the talent of any card in play. I think that would be a really interesting Titan.
That could be a good one for the fours, the Star Wars parody one. With clones.
The Astronauts?
Astronauts, thank you. What did I say?
The fours.
The fours.
Yeah, they use the fours.
They use the fours, right. Yeah. Otherwise, you could have them be like the last Titan.
I think you name the Titan Dolly, too. So, talent. Acquire the talent of any card in play. That would be pretty great.
That would be interesting. It'd be like a once per turn type thing. You could acquire any new.
It'd be like an
talent.
Ongoing or a talent.
No, it's specifically talent. Use the talent of any card in play.
Okay.
But you could use a different talent every turn.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
That'd be very interesting with the superheroes. Superhero sheep. There you go. That's one you could dream about.
Their little capes.
Because you could either cancel 2. You can cancel 2.
Or double your power. Like
with
DK
Captain
plus
Amazing.
2, yeah.
All right, now I'm actually going to be pretty disappointed if that's not the Titan. So let's just go ahead and assume that's going to be the case.
Well, if you did it with the burst, could you move the Titan to another base?
Well, it depends on whether or not he gets the abilities of a card, or if it's just strictly because we already have a card that does that, which is the copycat.
Okay.
And because you want to be very careful to prevent a situation where, because the copycat is great, the copycat can copy the invader and gain a victory point.
Mm-hmm.
If you were playing sheep aliens, then what you'd do is you would just play an invader and you'd copy that, and you'd copy that every turn, and you'd win the game in 14 or less turns. So you want to avoid that. That's why I'm thinking strictly talent.
I wonder if there was like a sheepdog Titan, and then he could allow you to move multiple cards. Would allow you to set up like chaining movement.
Oh, that'd be good. A
That might be
sheepdog.
interesting.
Yeah, like from Duck Hunt or something, like the Duck Hunt dog.
Yeah, exactly. And then it would allow you to set up, because some of the sheep can move on their own when other sheep move, so it would allow you to set up like chains of moving sheep.
Could you make like an infinite loop where like nothing ever happens if you're always continuously moving your sheep?
There's actually enough infinite loops already in the game. I mentioned before that there was a change in card text from the proposed German translation, and that was with shearing. The current text says, play on your minion, draw a card. Ongoing, this minion has -2 power. Return this action to your hand at the start of your turn. This is a very confusing card to use, because why would you give your own card -2 power in order to draw a card? Well, if you think of this as a delay mechanism where you're preventing the base from scoring by reducing your own power, knowing that the other player can't just hop on and finish the base off while also drawing a card, and it goes back to your hand, so it's a free draw your card. This can become an engine. As I mentioned before, I lost this card in the beginning of the game, and it really hurt me, because then I'm just drawing my 2 and there's nothing else I can do about it. But the original, I don't know, I can't verify if this was ever correct, but the way that it was translated from German was that you didn't put it into your hand at the start of your turn. You put it immediately back. You could put it immediately back into your hand. So you just give a minion -2 power, you draw a card, and you put it back into your hand, which would have created the ultimate aliens combo that you couldn't do anything about. The way it would work is you have the ram, move this minion to another base, then you may return a minion of power 2 or less at that base to its owner's hand.
And you put the invader back in your hand with aliens
Yes, because you use the shearing.
to reduce his power
To
by
reduce his
2.
power.
So he's a 1 now.
Yeah.
And then you do ram to put him back in.
And because you can play the invader on any base, the ram is just constantly moving to that base, so no base can score because he's in a different place every time. It's really hard to kill a minion of power 4. There aren't that many cards that do it. And I wonder if they realized that was just too powerful and changed the wording as a result. I was a little disappointed because, when you think about aliens, they're always doing the crop circles on a farm. And now, like, for the sheep to get in on the action, that would have made so much thematic sense. But unfortunately, it's not to be.
Well, I think it's a little too powerful that way. I think the way that it reads now is really interesting because even if you're preventing the base from scoring by using the card, you can also use the card to, in the early game, for a base, if there's not going to be enough power on the base for it to break before your next turn, then you can just use this to basically fleece your sheep and get a card. And I think that's that to my mind, when I read the text on this card, that's what I thought. I didn't think, oh, we could stop the base from scoring. I thought, oh, before the base even gets close to scoring, you could just use this to get cards out of your sheep. And I think that's could be really interesting.
And you can still use it to get your invader back. You just can't do it indefinitely. Because when you return the invader to your hand,
That card goes to the discard pile.
right. But it's an additional victory point. It functions like a indirect abduction that lets you draw a card, which isn't the worst thing in the world. So, maybe alien sheep could still work, but that's one that it would be very subject to how the cards come out, and I'd have to try that before I said anything. One faction that I know would not work well against the sheep, because I've been on the receiving end of this, is the geeks. Specifically because you're holding on to Hello Dolly as a trump card. And if you think about a trick-taking game, you have to be very careful when you play your trump card, because the only thing that can beat a trump is another trump. And if you're in that, you've wasted your good card for nothing. And I feel like the geeks also have 2 trumps in the form of Will Wheaton and the Force of Will. So you wait until you use Hello Dolly at the best moment, and then it just gets undone. And as a result, like, the Will Wheaton goes on the base, and now there's additional 4 power. I felt like I was held hostage by knowing that. And I was playing against the Greeks at that time, so they had all these good actions that I want to copy. But I can't, because I know that I'm going to get Will Wheatoned instead of the Greek player getting Will Wheatoned.
Right. That was a lovely time.
Actually, neither of us won that game.
No, we didn't.
I think any of the factions that return cards to your opponent's hand would be frustrating to try to play against the sheep, because the actual sheep minions, any of the black sheep, the flock, the ram, any of the minions that allow you to get more and more cards out, you don't want those going back to your opponent's hand. You want those in the discard pile if you can get them there. So any faction that focuses a lot on putting cards back into your opponent's hand would tend to be frustrating against the sheep, I think.
So are you saying that you would use the ram to return your own minions or to return your opponents? Because sometimes you're doing people a favor, like robots. When you return the Zapbot, it's like, okay, I'll just play another minion. Or the Microbot Fixer, you're doing them a favor by actually returning that card again.
But you could do that to, like, say, the Jumper for Time Travelers, where it's like, oh, well, it's the same ability he would have done anyway. You just fill up their hand so they're going to discard something else that may be good.
Yeah.
Right. That's the only way to really get rid of a Jumper, is to force him to the discard pile from the hand.
And I think some of the sheep, like the flock cards in particular, they say that after another minion moves from here to another base, you move this minion there as well. And there are 4 of them. So I think like they would be ones that if I were playing against the sheep, I would want them off the board because they'd just be moving around, clugging things up, and not actually. They're only a power of 2, so they're not going to help break the base a whole lot unless you have a bunch of them on there. So I think I would want to be able to get them off the board completely, out of players' hands, straight into the discard piles. So anything that just moves things around the board or puts things back into your opponent's hand, I think may not be as effective against the sheep as some of the other factions would be.
Ironically, I think the pirates are the best counter to the sheep because they can blow up the entire flock with a single card. But then again, the pirates are one of the best pairings with the sheep. So you're really helping your if you're like me and you don't play with multiple copies of the same faction, you're really helping your cause by using those two together.
But if, say, you don't have the pirates, someone else had it, they could be used as a good counter at the same time.
Yeah, you wait for them to go all on the same base, and then you blow them all up.
Yep.
I think that's another interesting layer of the complexity and the clear, thought that has been put into the game is that the pirates are very swashbuckling, so that like they could be helpful in the right instance, but they could also in the exact same manner be not helpful. I think that fits perfectly with their theme and overall characteristics.
The last thing I was going to say about the sheep was that when you look at their actions, they have a lot of good finishers, like ones that move one of your minions to set up, the end game breaking of a base. They also have a card that in shearing that is good to start in the beginning of the game for drawing cards. But one of their weaknesses is that they lack that midterm, where you want to set up something for a future turn. Because if you're going to be moving, more often than not, you want to do moving to finish off the base. Because once you start to consolidate your minions, either someone else will use that to break a base and overtake you, or you're subject to something like a cannon or a powder keg from the pirates, where everyone is now on the same base and you can blow them all up together. And you do have the 4 cloning cards, but given that they're far from a certainty, you have to be very careful about what you're doing in the mid game, and you'd probably want to focus on what does your other faction bring as far as that's concerned. The pirates actually have the same problem. They have some great finishers and they have stall tactics, but there's nothing you can really do to help your own cause. You can hurt a lot of people, but you can't really help your own cause in the mid game. So that would rule out things like dinosaurs, anyone who is just, all about breaking bases. If you haven't played with the sheep faction yet, I highly recommend that you do so. Try some of the combinations that we have specified. Try and think of some of your own. We'd love to hear what some of the success and the failure stories that you've had personally. Again, the faction's only been out for a week, and certain things sound good on paper, but when you play them, they can either be much better, they can be worse, and that's part of the excitement of Smash Up. You never really know how things are going to go until you try them.
So don't be sheepish about playing them.
Don't be sheepy.
This is Smash Up. I'm the Board Game Bandit, and our game has just begun.